Welcome to Witham Sounding Board, a podcast sharing powerful business tips, insights, and trends for those seeking to become a rock star in their industry.
Welcome to Witham's Perspectives from the Bankruptcy Cliff, where we provide our perspective on various questions related to insolvency and bankruptcy affecting individuals and businesses. I am Misty Urban, and I will be your host for this session. I am a member of Witham's Forensic Evaluation Services Group. Our team focuses on the unique needs of individuals and businesses going through a reorganization process, experiencing financial distress, or considering bankruptcy as an option. Today, I'm joined by John Liska, who is also a member of the team, to get his perspective on the topic of the different types of bankruptcy. We do need to start out by reminding everyone that the information you're about to hear is general in nature and should not be acted upon without the advice and counsel of qualified legal representation and financial advisors who can evaluate your unique circumstances. So let's get started. Hi, John. How you doing?
Great, Missy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, we're talking about different types of bankruptcy, and I think it's probably almost common knowledge that people say there's different chapters of bankruptcy. What are the chapters, and what actually do they mean?
So there's three main chapters that most people are familiar with: Chapter 7, 11, and 13. Chapter 7 is also known as liquidation bankruptcy because it often wipes out all or most of your debts, and in return, the bankruptcy trustee liquidates your property to pay those creditors. Chapter 7 is available to both individuals and businesses. Chapter 11 is designed primarily to allow businesses to reorganize their finances, including reducing payments while keeping their assets. Individuals can file for Chapter 11 if they don't meet the debt limits for the other chapters. However, it has a slightly higher cost, so most individuals typically use Chapter 13. There is a subchapter of Chapter 11 known as Subchapter 5, which is new. It became effective in February of 2020, and it was included as part of the Small Business Reform Act. And what it does is it allows small business debtors, those with less than 2.7 million, approximately 2.7 million in debt, it allows them to fast track or streamline the bankruptcy process for them. And a trustee is appointed in every case, and their job is to help facilitate a negotiation with the creditors and help develop that plan of reorganization. And then Chapter 13 is similar to Chapter 11, except it's primarily used by individuals, or only available to individuals. And the idea is the same. You're reorganizing your debts in order to have a payment plan that will allow you to eventually pay those debts off over a different time frame. There's also a couple other chapters available to very specific debtors. There's Chapter 9 for municipalities, Chapter 12 for farmers or fishermen, and Chapter 15 for international entities, but we're not going to really get into those today.
Okay, so if we keep it to the basics, that everyone's heard of, and you're talking about a 7, an 11, and 13, if you could just clarify the difference, just break it down, what really is the main difference between those?
So the big difference is Chapter 7 looks to liquidate your assets and pay off any debtors with the proceeds they receive, whereas in a Chapter 11 or 13, you're really looking to restructure that debt and ultimately pay off those debts in their entirety. So you don't lose any of your property under Chapter 11 or Chapter 13, and instead you're funding those payments through your income.
Okay, then if you're looking at what's next, you have an 11 and a subchapter. What is that, if you can break that difference down?
So the primary difference is the debt limit. For small businesses, it's geared towards small businesses with debts at or around 2.7 million. Although recently, with the CARES Act, the limit has been up to $7.5 million for a 1-year period, and that's really relative to the COVID issues.
Okay, can you explain the process for filing each and the basic timeline?
So all bankruptcy cases begin with an initial filing with the bankruptcy court. In a Chapter 7 filing, the time frame is about 2 to 3 months. The bankruptcy trustee is going to identify your assets, liquidate any eligible assets, and pay your creditors. Any remaining balance of the debt owed is then discharged. In a Chapter 11 or 13, the time horizon could be much longer. It can be anywhere from several months to several years, and you're working with your creditors to find a timeline that will work for all the parties. That's really the timeline for those.
Okay, so if I'm looking to, I'm in a situation where I want to keep my property, I'm not trying, sell off all my assets and lose my house. What is the bankruptcy option I should engage in?
So in most situations, a Chapter 11 or Chapter 13, depending on a business or individual, will allow for reorganization and repayment of your loans without having to liquidate any assets. But in order to do so, you're going to have to still be generating enough income in order to make those debt payments. Otherwise, you likely won't qualify and you'll have to file Chapter 7. There are certain situations in Chapter 7, depending on the locale you live in, that may allow you to protect sufficient assets that a Chapter 7 may be an appropriate filing decision. However, if most of your largest debts are secured debts, you're probably going to be better off filing Chapter 13, because Chapter 13 will allow you to pay off those debts over a secured debt, those past due secured debts over time, whereas Chapter 7 does not discharge secured liabilities. So an auto loan, a home loan, the creditor is going to look to sell your asset in order to get the proceeds to pay off the debt owed.
I mean, that's a lot to consider. So you're sitting here, I'm in a bad, tough situation. 7, you have 13, you have, how do I, do I get to choose? Do I say, okay, I'm just going to pick one? How does it work?
So primarily the decision to file is yours. There are certain factors that will come into play, which is why you really need to make sure you have legal counsel and an advisor that you trust that specializes in bankruptcy and will be able to give you the proper guidance.
Now, are there limitations on the use of each chapter?
There is in some cases. Aside from the type of debtor, business versus individual, there's also debt limits that must be considered, as well as the cash flow of the debtor. Again, your advisor is going to examine all of these, take a look at all your finances and determine whether you can afford to pay your creditors, or this is typically known as the means test. Do you have the ability to pay your debts? If you fail the means test, then you'll likely need to file Chapter 7. They're going to liquidate your assets and get as much return that they can. However, if you do pass the means test, you may be able to consider filing Chapter 11 or Chapter 13.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough consideration. And I'm looking at it even like from a business perspective. If I'm a business owner and I want to file, and I'm going to have to consider filing for bankruptcy, what opportunities are there for me to retain my business?
So you'd have to file Chapter 11 in order to retain control. And you will retain control during the reorganization process. However, you're going to lose control over some of those major decision-making processes. You're not going to be able to sell assets at will, or enter or break into new leases, expanding or contracting operations, et cetera. These are items that your creditors are going to now have a say in. This is known when management is continuing to run the business. This is known as debtor in possession. And during this time, the business owner is trying to develop a plan that is going to be voted on by the creditors to continue to run the business and resolve any of the creditors' claims. And this can take anywhere from a few months to over a year for that plan to be approved and adopted. And in the current environment, given the cost of Chapter 11, most debtors will opt for the sale of their assets so that they can be sold free and clear of any liens. Once the sale is complete, any remaining assets and legal actions of the debtor are typically transferred to a liquidating trust, or the debtor entity is converted to a Chapter 7 and liquidated entirely.
So I guess, does it boil down really to just it's better to sell my business when I'm in a bankruptcy?
The answer is it depends. By selling your business during a bankruptcy, you're allowing a buyer to acquire the assets free and clear. which should help maximize the amount of proceeds you would receive, but most business owners are not usually willing to take any other options before selling their business.
Yeah, you can understand that. When you've maybe put your years and time into a business that you own, it's probably a tough decision to consider selling it. But I thank you, John. That was very useful information. And you really gave us a good idea of the different types of bankruptcy that I hope the listeners have found helpful. Should anyone have any specific questions regarding your unique circumstances, please reach out to a member of our team. Our contact information can be found at witham.com under Forensic Evaluation Services. This episode, as well as others in the series, can also be found at witham.com. Thank you for listening to Witham's Perspectives from the Bankruptcy Cliff.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you'll be first in line to hear what's coming next. Don't want to wait for our next episode? Check us out at witham.com. That's WITHUM.com.